Welcome, dear viewers, to the next analysis and commentary news bulletin on the situation in the Middle East regarding the unrelenting war between Iran and the U.S.-Israel alliance, updated and deeply dissected on the Wider Meaning channel. Dear viewers, today the United States and Iran will sit down together at the negotiating table of life and death in Islamabad to jointly decide the fate of the Middle East before the chess game of the five nations begins. Let us see how the United States and Israel are doing right now. In combat, hegemons often dig their own graves with their own blind arrogance when they dare to underestimate their opponent. Washington and Tel Aviv are the same. They beat their chests in self-satisfaction with the Epic Fury campaign, nurturing the illusion of a destructive stroll in the skies over Tehran. But they did not expect that they had stepped into an inescapable Bagua death trap with no way out. Do not look at the collapsed buildings or the billowing smoke and fire in Isfahan to measure the overall situation. Those are merely the outer shell of a firepower drama. Look instead at the eyes of the commanders at the Pentagon, filled with extreme horror when they realize a bitter truth. The thousands of targets they had just dropped bombs on were in fact only cheap scrap models. Meanwhile, the war soul of Tehran still stands tall in fortresses hundreds of meters deep underground. They are present there like silent, cold-blooded assassins, calmly observing their prey, which is now exhausted from chasing deadly illusions. The Middle East Game of Thrones has just reversed spectacularly. The American eagle is breaking its wings, and the old fox Netanyahu is in his final death throes. Donald Trump is frantically looking for an honorable way out before the entire Gulf fleet turns into floating steel coffins drifting on a sea of flames. But what bitter reality is waiting for them behind the smokescreen? Why can a superpower that possesses a satellite array covering every square meter of the ground get so foolishly bogged down like this? Is Israel really dominating the skies, or are they just moths being lured into a giant operational pocket, only to suffer devastating counterattacks that tear apart every shield? And most importantly, what terrifying trump cards is the Bagua formation that Tehran has laid out actually containing that makes the entire West tremble in fear? All will be decoded right here. In this video, the channel will expose the 7 deadly links in Iran's strategy that are turning the Middle East into the grave of honor for the U.S.-Israel alliance, while also revealing how Tehran has forced Washington to seek an escape route in utter disgrace. Before going into the detailed analysis, please like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any important videos about the developments of this war that is not yet truly ended. If you love the 34 warriors, please give them the best comments. Thank you all. The death gate opens wide to deceive the Pentagon satellites. In the art of war, the pinnacle of military strategy does not lie in muscle-showing displays of hard against hard, but in the ability to drain the opponent's strength and create illusory images. Tehran has elevated this philosophy into a bewitching real combat religion when Donald Trump arrogantly declared that 13,000 targets had been flattened. The Pentagon seems to have forgotten that they are facing a civilization with thousands of years of experience in camouflage and deception. The death gate in Iran's Bagua formation is not where they die, but where they lure America's trillion-dollar assets and a meaningless maze, turning Washington's air power into an expensive farce. Look at the satellite images that Western intelligence boasts as brilliant victories, the black burn marks, the giant bomb craters at missile bases that are said to have been wiped out. But what is the naked truth? It is a meticulously staged drama down to every detail. Tehran built simulated military special zones containing thousands of mock missile models made of composite materials and radar-reflective materials, along with mobile launchers. In particular, Iran's camouflage technique does not stop at outward appearance. They also installed devices that emit simulated heat and electromagnetic signals identical to an operating base. The result? Smart bombs worth millions of US dollars or Tomahawk cruise missiles, each one dropped onto piles of scrap iron and inflatable models. The more bombs America drops, the deeper they sink into endless waste. Every airstrike promoted as breaking Iran's backbone is in reality just punches into thin air. Meanwhile, Tehran's real strategic treasure remains intact under impenetrable geological layers. While the U.S. Air Force is busy plowing the ground in vain, Iran's military arteries continue to flow powerfully in the large missile cities hidden deep underground. These are by no means crude hiding bunkers, but a complex tunnel network rooted from 500 to 1,000 meters below limestone mountain ranges with hardness that challenges every type of penetrating bomb. Here, Tens of thousands of missiles are placed on automatic conveyor systems that can continuously move between different launch points. Iran's illusory tactic here is the transformation between real and fake. When U.S. satellites detect a tunnel entrance opening, swarms of F-35 aircraft will immediately swoop in. But what they receive is only an explosive trap or a fake tunnel entrance designed to withstand force. While America is busy bombing that abandoned tunnel entrance, at a coordinate dozens of kilometers away, the real missile batteries have quietly risen, fired, and disappeared before the opponent's radar could respond. This is exactly how Iran completely neutralizes the West's preemptive strike doctrine. America cannot destroy what it cannot find, and it certainly cannot eliminate an enemy that is always present everywhere yet nowhere at the same time. The Pentagon's failure in target identification also comes from Iran, having mastered the art of jamming and manipulating GPS signals. In this Bagua formation, the electromagnetic space is the thickest layer of fog. Iran's long-range jamming systems have created information white zones where even America's most advanced unmanned reconnaissance devices, such as the RQ-4 Global Hawk, become useless. Tehran is extremely skillful by not completely blocking the signal, but instead injecting subtly altered coordinates into the opponent's positioning system. Bombs programmed to strike command centers are instead diverted to empty fields or evacuated civilian areas, creating media disasters that force America to stop. This is no longer a conventional gunpowder war, but a battle of wits between one side relying on technology and the other deeply understanding psychological warfare and fire deception techniques. Imagine the humiliation of Donald Trump sitting in the Situation Room, looking at charts reporting fake victories, while in reality, Iran's retaliatory capability has not decreased even by a small part. Every flight by the U.S. Air Force at this moment no longer carries a deterrent meaning, but resembles an expensive performance to cover up intelligence deadlock. Israel, the closest ally, is also falling into a similar situation. Intelligence agencies such as Mossad or Unit 8200, once praised as divine, are now reeling in the dual information battle of truth and falsehood created by Tehran. They are lost in their own confidence, wasting precious reserve resources and worthless targets. Then, when Iran truly unleashes its punitive strike, they can only stand by and watch in helplessness. Iran's death gate has opened, but not to welcome the enemy and let them die immediately, but to imprison them in a war that drains mind and spirit, where all conventional military logic is overturned. Washington and Tel Aviv are like blind giants swinging thousand-pound punches into thin air, while the F-35 Shadow is still calmly controlling the chessboard as it wishes. This is the beginning of the collapse. Once confidence in absolute power is shaken by fake models and dark tunnels, the American superpower crown has also begun to crack, and that is only the tip of the iceberg in this earth-shaking Bagua formation. Never use the hothead of a businessman or the arrogance of a ruler to confront the wisdom of a nation that considers war an art of arrangement. Part 1 ends with the bewilderment of the Pentagon, but the real nightmare has only just begun when moving to the next part. The air defense matrix where Israel's Iron Dome will be melted in a ring of fire, Iran's air defense matrix, and the nightmare of Israel's killer birds. If Part 1 was the illusory drama that made the Americans punch into thin air, then Part 2 is the brutal reality that Tel Aviv is experiencing under a sky of raging fire. The Middle East in Tehran's Bagua formation is not a passive defensive barrier, but a living entity. A firepower matrix designed to crush the pride of the Israeli Air Force and turn the invincible defense systems into expensive piles of high-tech scrap. For decades, Israel has lulled the world with the legend of the Iron Dome and Arrow, shields advertised as impenetrable. But in the 2026 battlefield, that legend has been melted in a rain of metal. Tel Aviv's fatal mistake was believing they could use an interception system worth several $million to stop Tehran's assets worth only a few $1,000s. Iran does not strike directly at Israel's strengths. They strike at Israel's wallet and the computational capacity of ground-based air defense. Iran launches swarms of cheap suicide UAVs, called Shahed, coordinated with low-altitude cruise missiles. Iran has created a classic target overload situation when Israel's radar detects thousands of bright spots on the screen. The central computer of the Iron Dome falls into logical paralysis. Expensive Tamir missiles are fired indiscriminately to intercept decoys made of plastic and simple engines. Then, when the real long-range ballistic missiles appear at hypersonic speed, Israel's launchers are left as empty steel tubes. The Iron Dome is now no different from a torn net in front of a giant sandstorm. This is the essence of the war of attrition. Iran uses cheap technology to exchange for the opponent's expensive assets, causing Israel's strategic reserve stockpile to deplete faster than the speed at which it can produce them. Every second that passes, Tel Aviv's defense budget burns with each meaningless interceptor missile. Meanwhile, the sky is still far from peaceful. While Israel struggles with inner-city defense, its F-35 and F-15 pilots are facing hell on earth in Iranian airspace. Tehran has deployed a multi-layered, multi-tiered air defense system, with the core being S-300 and Khordad 1-5 complexes. The most terrifying combat point here is not the range, but the extreme frequency hopping and stealth capability. Unlike NATO's old doctrine of placing fixed radar stations that are easy to destroy, Iran has turned the entire western land into a mobile death zone. Missile launch vehicles continuously move within tunnel networks, turning on radar for only a few seconds to lock onto targets and then immediately disappearing into natural caves. Israeli pilots, accustomed to absolute electronic dominance, now feel like birds lost in a maze full of traps. When the target lock warning sounds in the cockpit, that is also the moment when the Syad missile is right beside the fuselage. No chance to evade, no room for error. The most expensive fifth-generation fighters on the planet, advertised as invisible to radar, are being shot down by the sophisticated combination of active infrared sensors and Iran's domestic artificial intelligence. Each downed aircraft is not only a financial loss, but also a heavy blow to the reputation of the Israeli Air Force. The Air Force that once considered itself undefeated in the Middle East. Israel's disorientation comes from Tehran deploying powerful electronic warfare systems that cause widespread jamming and directly interfere with data link signals. Iran has severed the communication link between fighter jets and the command center in Tel Aviv. Imagine an Israeli pilot flying over enemy airspace. Suddenly, all display screens turn to white noise, digital maps show incorrect data, and voices from the base are replaced by chaotic radio signals. That is when Iran's air defense matrix swallows its prey. High-tech devices that were once the pride of the West now become burdens when they cannot connect in coordinated combat. Tehran has turned the opponent's advantages into fatal weaknesses. The more Israel relies on satellites, the more Iran focuses on attacking relay stations. The more Israel believes in stealth, the more Iran uses passive phased array radar to detect heat signatures. This is no longer a confrontation between old and new, but a battle of wits between one side relying on money and the other relying on real combat thinking. Israel is paying in blood for its technological arrogance, while Iran fights with deep understanding of terrain and environment. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu is urgently requesting the United States for thousands of Patriot and Tamir missiles. But Washington's stockpiles are also running low after prolonged conflicts. In Washington, Donald Trump is beginning to realize that protecting Israel is no longer a simple airstrike campaign. Tehran's Ring of Fire is not only burning aircraft fleets, but also burning the political prestige of the entire alliance. America's allies are beginning to question, if Israel cannot even defend itself against Iran, then is the American protective umbrella still valuable? Panic spreads when firepower from Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen begins to coordinate with Tehran, forming a giant Bagua formation that tightens around Israel from all directions. The Bagua formation in the Middle East has completed its mission by breaking the opponent's will to attack, by proving that no matter how modern the weapons, they cannot dominate the skies of an enemy that has turned every patch of airspace into a deadly trap. Israel is lost not because of lack of weapons, but because it has stepped into a matrix where all conventional rules of war are overturned and rewritten in blood. Technology is a tool of humans, but when overly dependent on it, it will turn against its owner. Israel is being melted in the Bagua furnace created by its own arrogance. Do not rush to pity the broken-winged F-35S or the neutralized Patriot systems, because ahead lies an even more humiliating collapse when American forces frantically deploy pilot rescue operations in chaos, marking the end of a hegemonic era in the Gulf. American F-15s fall in panic during the disastrous rescue operation. passing through the screens of intellectual deception and illusory firepower matrix. Now the brutal reality begins to strike directly at Donald Trump's ambition to reestablish order. The arrogance of the American eagle is crushed into blood and tears on the dry limestone mountain ranges of Iran. When the F-15 Strike Eagle, the pride of the Pentagon's air attack power, is shot down, that is not only the fall of a nearly $100 million iron block, but also the collapse of an undefeated symbol over Western Iranian airspace. Amid the dense electromagnetic clouds created by Tehran's jamming systems, the F-15E, with the call sign Reaper, one is carrying out a mission to destroy strategic ammunition depots. The American pilot, with thousands of flight hours and support from the world's most sophisticated positioning satellite array, believes he is the hunter. But in Tehran's Bagua formation, the hunter and the prey often swap positions in the blink of an eye. Iran's passive air defense system, which emits no radar signal to be detected, has quietly tracked the heat signature from the Pratt & Whitney engines of the F-15. When the Sayyad missile suddenly surges up from a secret mountain crevice, the American pilot only manages to utter a cry of horror before the cockpit explodes. The proud aircraft breaks in half, falling freely like a bird hit by a bullet in the vast forest. One pilot successfully ejects but falls straight into the control area of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces. The other is missing in the night. This is the beginning of a series of humiliating tragedies that Donald Trump never wants to mention. As soon as the distress signal is received, the Pentagon falls into a state of panic. Trump cannot allow an American pilot to be displayed before the world. That would be a direct blow to his prestige. A lightning-fast rescue operation is activated with the participation of Super Special Forces and Air Commandos, under the cover of a 10 Thunderbolt II aircraft and HH-60 Pave Hawk helicopters, but Tehran has been waiting for them. They do not rush to capture the pilot immediately, but use him as bait to lure the entire rescue force into a deadly trap. When the rescue formation enters the valley, they realize they are not facing outdated guerrilla fighters, but a regular force with dense shoulder-fired air defense firepower like a forest. The A-10s, famous for their titanium armor, are now torn apart under 20.3 mm and 35 mm anti-aircraft artillery fire. The sound of jet engines is drowned out by the continuous explosions from the ground. One A-10 is hit in the tail and has to turn back to escape with one engine on fire. The rescue turns into a chaotic retreat. American Special Forces taste for the first time the feeling of being forced into a weak position when facing an opponent that understands the terrain and shows no fear. At the White House, Donald Trump flies into a rage when images of the charred F-15E spread across the internet just hours later. The calculations of a businessman collapse before Iran's cold strategic thinking. Trump believed that military pressure would force Tehran to submit, but every downed aircraft becomes fuel for Iran's fighting spirit. The failure of the rescue operation is not only a loss of equipment, but also a heavy blow to America's rapid intervention doctrine. When elite forces are forced to retreat in chaos, the world realizes that the era of absolute American dominance in the Middle East has begun to shake. Trump begins to look for a way out of the quagmire not only on the battlefield but also in domestic public opinion. His tough statements now become ironic when the U.S. military itself is being drawn into a maze with no escape. Meanwhile, Tehran's leaders maintain a frightening calm, needing few words, because the wreckage of the F-15E and the images of American helicopters retreating have already said everything. Iran is holding the initiative, controlling the pace of the battlefield, and directly affecting Washington's political psychology through Trump's failures. America's deadlock lies in the fact that it possesses destructive power, but lacks the ability to win in an asymmetric war. Every American reaction is within Tehran's calculations. The more Trump tries to salvage his image, the deeper he is drawn into the local attrition trap in the western mountainous region, a trap that not only buries one aircraft, but also buries the illusion of absolute power. America has lost its way in the ring of fire, and, for the first time in modern history, an American president must find a way to retreat with honor from a war he thought he had firmly in hand. The eagle is only strong when it is high above, but when dragged down into the mud, it becomes weak. Donald Trump has had to face the bitter lesson that in Iran's Bagua formation, guns and bullets are not as important as patience, and technology cannot replace human will. But that is not yet the end. because the consequences of this failure are spreading to the global economic arteries at the Strait of Hormuz, where it could spark the collapse of the world energy order. Hell in Hormuz, raging fire and the economic throat being tightened. Just emerging from the vital point strikes in the air and on the ground, this next chapter is the fatal blow that pierces the empire's bloodstream at the Strait of Hormuz. In Tehran's Bagua formation, Hormuz is not just an inland waterway. Iran's swarm and rescue tactics here have turned America's mighty fleet into expensive hostages in a high-risk game. Look at the military map of the Gulf. A narrow strait where America's super aircraft carriers worth tens of billions of US dollars are forced to move in a suddenly cramped space, no different from whales trapped in a dried-up pond. This is exactly where Iran has established a terrifying anti-access, area denial, A2AD zone. Donald Trump once declared he would open Hormuz wide with fleet power, but battlefield reality is proving the opposite. Iran does not need a blue water fleet to confront the U.S. Navy directly. It uses swarm tactics with thousands of unmanned high-speed boats carrying powerful warheads. These boats are small, highly maneuverable, difficult for radar to detect, and can attack simultaneously from all directions. When an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer faces dozens of suicide boats charging at the same time, all defense systems and interceptor missiles become overloaded. The continuous explosions in the ocean not only destroy the ship's hull but also collapse the belief and the doctrine of maritime hegemony that America has built over many decades. Washington's deadlock in Hormuz also comes from invisible weapons. Iran has sown thousands of new-generation smart naval mines into the seabed, capable of recognizing warship sounds and self-activating when the target enters the danger zone. The U.S. fleet is forced to move slowly, meter by meter of water. Every step carries the risk of destruction. On the surface, along Iran's rocky coastline, are rows of shore-to-sea cruise missile launchers, such as Noor, Gadir, and Gadr, hidden in natural caves. With just one launch order, the ring of fire can sweep away all targets within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. America wants to use aircraft carriers to deter, but the aircraft carriers themselves become giant targets with no maneuverability. Trump was wrong to think that military power could subdue an opponent that holds absolute geographical advantage. When the strait is blockaded, oil prices soar, and global financial markets are shaken. Only then do people realize that real control does not lie in Washington, but in the hands of IRGC commanders watching from the Iranian coast. Tehran's swarm and rescue tactics directly target America's economic lifeline and alliance system. When energy flows are disrupted, Western economies begin to face internal pressure with rising inflation and widespread social instability. America's allies gradually waver as they have to protect their own interests. This is a high-level strategic strike. Iran does not need to attack directly, but only needs to tighten the energy route to force the opponent to descend. The paradox lies in the fact that a military superpower is being restrained by a nation under prolonged sanctions. The more America increases its military presence, the more targets it creates for the opponent. Every warship entering Hormuz is like a chess piece placed in a disadvantageous position in a pre-calculated chess game. Trump once spoke of America first, but the reality in Hormuz shows increasing isolation. Many merchant ships avoid sailing with American forces for fear of being drawn into conflict. The image of warships having to withdraw far beyond the range of shore-based missiles is clear proof of the changing situation. The Bagua formation at Hormuz has turned this area into a dangerous hotspot for any force that wants to impose itself by force. Tehran proves that in modern warfare, geographical advantage and thorough preparation can balance or even reverse technological superiority. America is having difficulty maintaining the initiative, and economic pressure is increasing. The Strait of Hormuz is gradually becoming a strategic choke point, signaling major changes in the regional balance of power. The strongest is not the one with the greatest power, but the one who knows how to use it at the right time and right place. Donald Trump has had to face the reality that control of the global economy does not depend solely on military power, but also on strategic choke points like Hormuz. However, this is not yet the end, as subsequent developments may be even more complex, with new counterattacks and profound changes in the global energy order. Iran's domestic missiles crush American technology, beyond the prejudices about an Iran that is merely a scrapyard of the Soviet Union or an outdated copy from China. The reality now is a direct, resounding slap in the face of Western arrogance. In Tehran's Bagua formation, the counterattack is not a desperate counteroffensive but a peak performance of military technology, where Iran's domestic missile lines personally tear apart the glamorous mask of NATO. Donald Trump and the Pentagon generals are facing a brutal reality. Their defense systems worth billions of dollars are being subdued by Iranian minds that have been preparing for this war for half a century. Look at what happened at Al-Assad base and the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers offshore. When Iran activated the counterattack, they did not use quantity to overwhelm but used sophistication to suppress. The hypersonic Fateh II missile, the pride of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, executed erratic flight trajectories that no American supercomputer could predict. With a speed exceeding Mach 15 and the ability to change trajectory even within the atmosphere, Fateh does not fly along the traditional parabolic path, but glides across the sky like a ghost, turning America's Aegis system and Spy-6 radar into blind machines. Each Fateh descending carries not only a warhead but also the bankruptcy of NATO's missile defense doctrine when America's strategic logistics bases in Qatar and the UAE are attacked with extreme precision. Washington is forced to admit that the era of absolute safety has ended. This is no longer a game of the stronger side, but a game of the faster and smarter side. NATO's losses also come from cruise missile lines such as Pave and Sumar. While America is proud of the Tomahawk, Iran has created silent assassins capable of flying at extremely low altitudes, hugging the sea surface, or following terrain to avoid long-range radar. In strikes against Israel's coordination systems and radars, numerous missiles penetrated the blind zones of the defense systems without being detected in time. They do not need expensive stealth coatings, but exploit terrain and natural interference to hide. The result is that when the alarm sounds, the target is only seconds away from being hit. The counterattack shows that Tehran has mastered domestically developed guidance technology combined with artificial intelligence, allowing missiles to autonomously identify and attack targets without external support. NATO has been defeated right in the field of technology that it once dominated. Donald Trump once believed that money could buy victory, but on this battlefield, every dollar spent by Tehran brings far superior effectiveness compared to Washington. One SM-3 interceptor missile costs millions of US dollars, while Iran's missiles have much lower production costs. In the war of attrition, Iran uses older missile lines to force America's defense systems to fire, depleting stockpiles, and only then unleashes modern missile lines to deliver the finishing blow. This is classical military art elevated into modern doctrine. America is like a heavyweight boxer, throwing expensive punches into thin air, only to be knocked down by one precise and unexpected strike. The counterattack not only causes material damage but also shakes NATO's unity. When European bases come under threat, allies begin to worry about the price they have to pay. Washington's protection commitments become unconvincing when its own forces struggle to defend themselves. Trump's deadlock lies in the fact that he applied maximum pressure on Iran but only made this opponent develop even stronger. Iran's domestic missile programs have become proof of the failure of the sanctions policy. Tehran has not weakened. On the contrary, it has enhanced its strategic capabilities. The lesson here is that one cannot underestimate a nation that has turned pressure into a driving force for development. Trump placed too much faith in technical specifications and forgot that the battlefield is where the decision is made. Iran's counterattack has turned the skies over the Gulf into a stage displaying the decline of Washington's influence. But that is not yet the end, because when weapons have spoken, the negotiating table will be where the consequences of this confrontation are shaped more clearly. Donald Trump before the fierce negotiating table and the kneeling of a superpower, when the explosions of the Fateh and Pave missiles gradually subside on the front pages, a war far more brutal and brain-intensive is taking place in the shadows of backstage diplomacy. Donald Trump, who has always been proud of his book, The Art of the Deal, is now tasting a harsh reality. On the 2026 Middle East chessboard, he is no longer the one in control. In Tehran's Bagua formation, the life gate only opens for those who know how to bow their heads and admit mistakes, and Trump is frantically searching for that escape route in disgrace. Do not be deceived by the tough social media posts or fiery speeches Trump makes in public. Behind the closed doors of the Oval Office is an atmosphere thick with despair. According to leaked intelligence sources, since the pilot rescue disaster and the paralysis of the fleet at Hormuz, Washington has used intermediary channels, such as Oman and Switzerland, to send no fewer than 10 secret letters to Tehran. Their content is no longer demands for nuclear disarmament or stopping support for Hezbollah. Instead, they are urgent proposals for de-escalation. Trump needs a ceasefire faster than anyone. He needs it to save the American stock market that is evaporating thousands of billions of dollars every day due to soaring oil prices. He needs it to soothe the rising anti-war wave right in Washington. And above all, he needs this life gate to keep the presidential chair that is shaking violently on the eve of the election. The humiliation lies in the fact that the man who once declared he would destroy Iran is now pleading for a chance to retreat with honor. In contrast to Washington's panic, Tehran's leadership displays a frightening calm. They understand that in the Bagua formation, whoever is impatient loses. Tehran is in no hurry to accept any proposal. Each time America softens its tone, Iran raises higher demands. The negotiating table at this moment is no longer a place to discuss peace, but a place where Tehran carries out a diplomatic execution of Western arrogance. The conditions Iran sets make the Pentagon tremble. America must withdraw all troops from Iraq and Syria. Israel must end all blockade activities in Gaza. And most importantly, Washington must compensate hundreds of billions of dollars for the infrastructure damage caused by the Epic Fury campaign. Trump is facing a cruel choice: either continue a war with no path to victory and watch America sink economically, or sign a bitter retreat agreement in exchange for temporary stability in the region. Tehran's wisdom is also shown in its ability to divide Trump's alliance right at the negotiating table. While America frantically seeks an escape, Tehran has secretly opened separate dialogue channels with America's allies in Europe and the Gulf, offering security, energy, and trade commitments to countries willing to abandon Washington. An unprecedented crack has begun to appear in the NATO bloc. France and Germany openly criticize Trump's policy as a strategic mistake. Arab countries that once supported America now turn to cooperate with Tehran to protect their energy interests. Trump realizes he is alone in the Bagua formation. Every effort to drag allies into a total war has failed in the face of Iran's combination of hard and soft power. Trump's only life gate is actually the death gate for America's influence in the Middle East. History will remember 2026 as a bitterly painful milestone in Donald Trump's career. The image of an American president having to accept sitting at the negotiating table in a passive position, while the opponent's missiles are still aimed straight at his aircraft carriers, is clear proof of the failure of the maximum pressure policy. Trump wanted a deal for the ages, and he has got it, but not a victory, but a commitment to retreat. Tehran has taught Washington a lesson about patience and real combat. Money and technology can buy weapons, but they cannot buy position at the negotiating table if one does not control the battlefield. America is retreating not with hasty flights but with torn lines on secret agreements. The unipolar order is shaking right here. At the negotiating table, words only have value when backed by real power. Donald Trump trusted too much in his own negotiating ability and forgot that against an opponent ready to fight to the end, every negotiating tactic becomes fragile. But this retreat is still not the final chapter. The chain collapse and the death of the unipolar order. The Bagua formation of Tehran was not only designed to defeat one army, but to declare the end of an era. When the fear gate, the pass of fear and upheaval, officially closes, the world is stunned to realize that the ghost of American hegemony in the Middle East has dissolved into thin air. This is no longer a tactical retreat. This is a geopolitical rout, where Washington's domino pieces collapse under the fierce pressure of battlefield reality. The most painful slap for Donald Trump does not come from Iran's missiles, but from the cold turn of countries, once considered America's financial sources and forward bases. From Riyadh to Abu Dhabi, warning signals have sounded. Witnessing America's shield being pierced by Iranian firepower, the Gulf monarchies understand that continuing to depend on a weakening superpower only leads to existential risks. In an unprecedented development in April, many Arab countries have refused to allow American aircraft to use their airspace for military operations and have secretly sent high-level delegations to Tehran to establish bilateral security agreements. The old order in which Washington held absolute dominance has officially been broken. America is facing the risk of isolation right in the region, once considered its strategic focal point. On the Israeli side, Netanyahu is facing an extremely difficult situation. America's attempt to retreat has left Israel in a state of isolation amid increasing security pressure. Without unlimited military and diplomatic support, Israel is forced to face the reality that its current military strategy cannot achieve the set goals. This change spreads to allied armed forces in the region. As Iran gains the upper hand, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and forces in Iraq simultaneously increase pressure, putting Israel into a complex defensive position on multiple fronts. Trump's difficulty lies in the fact that he is committed to protecting Israel, but must face real limits on resources and domestic pressure. Meanwhile, the greatest impact of the feargate appears in the economic field. The disruption of the Strait of Hormuz and the inability to ensure maritime traffic have created profound fluctuations in the energy market. Oil prices have risen sharply, and countries have begun seeking alternative payment methods, weakening the role of the U.S.-led financial system. Washington's economic power base is therefore under considerable pressure. These developments show a clear reality. The global power structure is changing. America no longer holds the absolute position as before, and new power centers are gradually forming. This event is not only a regional conflict, but also an important milestone in the transition to a multipolar order. The Middle East is no longer an area under unilateral dominance, but is becoming a complex, competitive space among many actors. This confrontation will be remembered as a great lesson about the limits of military power when not accompanied by appropriate strategy. The recent developments show that technology and financial resources are not enough to guarantee victory if there is no ability to adapt to the real environment. America faces difficulties not because of lack of capability, but because it has not fully assessed the opponent and the context. When strategic factors change, old assumptions no longer work. The fog of war will eventually lift, but its impacts will continue for a long time. The Middle East is entering a new phase with many unpredictable variables. The current situation reflects the shift in power and raises many questions about the future of the international system. The battle has not yet ended, but its consequences continue to spread. In this complex competitive environment, the decisive factor is not only initial power, but the ability to maintain position until the end. Thank you, dear viewers, for accompanying the Wider Meaning channel until the final minute of the video. Please continue to follow for in-depth analyses of important geopolitical developments in the time ahead. And now, allow me to bid you farewell.